You know, this one was weird because while I enjoyed the reading experience, I'm not sure that I ended up liking the actual book.
I can't remember which American writer it was. I heard him speak and he said that his job is to comfort the disturbed and to disturb the comfortable.
Welcome to Books You Haven't Read. My name is Nate Rankin, and today I want to talk about The Fat Years by Koonchang. I'm recording this on June 5th, which is a day after the anniversary of the Tiananmen Square massacre, so I feel like it's kind of appropriate. I came across this book last fall when I was putting together kind of a perspective list of different Chinese novels I wanted to check out. Most of them have kind of a dystopian bent, and this was really in response to the ongoing Uyghur genocide. I'm really interested in seeing how Chinese writers portray particularly the Chinese government, and sort of which novels get people in trouble over there. This one is sort of famous for being banned on mainland China. It's also really famous for being like a gift that, will be handed out on the mainland at dinner parties. And while this book doesn't deal directly with the Uyghur genocide, it does deal just in general with a lot of the different repressive actions that the Chinese government has taken throughout the last couple decades. First off, I really like the cover. You see, we've got Mao Zedong back there, and then you've got, not only here, you've got the big kind of image of the sticker, but it's all around, kind of even to the back, and these are all little smiley face or sticker icons, and kind of forced happiness is one of the themes in this book. This was originally written in 2009, translated in 2011, and it takes place in a forecasted 2013. In this hyper-present dystopia, there's a new Great Depression that takes place after the recession of 08-09. The depression takes place in 2011. The rest of the world goes through economic collapse. Meanwhile, China and China alone is going through a new period of ascendancy. Our main protagonist is Lao Chen, and he is a Taiwanese journalist and writer who at the start of the novel is undergoing some writer's block. He's middle-aged. He was, I can't remember his exact age, but he was a young man in the 90s during a period of reform for China. And the action of the novel really kicks off because there's a month missing from kind of the calendar and also just collective social memory. And his two friends make up the other main characters, and the first one is Fang Caodi, and this guy is almost kind of like a Kramer-like character, from Seinfeld. So his parents were, his father was a counter-revolutionary to the communist regime, and his mother was part of some kind of underground church. And so this makes him a persona non grata basically from childhood. He's forced to work in a mine as a young kid, and then at one point lives in a hippie commune in America, and then at another point he's working in the import and export industry in Nigeria, and as an older man he, moves back into China. The other main character is a woman named Little Ji, and she's about the same age as Lao Chen, and she is the daughter of a restaurant owner. This was kind of a hangout for sort of younger intellectuals. The restaurant's called The Five Flavors. Back in the day, Lao Chen always kind of had a little crush on Little Ji, but he never made his move, and she always seemed to be getting attention from kind of the other younger intellectuals at the restaurant. So both of these characters tell Lao Chen that there's a month missing from the Chinese calendar, but he doesn't remember this, and he really doesn't trust these claims that they're making. Little Ji, throughout most of the novel, is actually sort of going into hiding. Lao Chen at different points is kind of tracking her down based on suspected usernames that she uses, but she basically gets into arguments online. She's basically the poster of the novel. She gets into all these arguments with very pro-government posters, and all of her stuff, of course, ends up getting deleted and censored. She gets afraid that people are following her, so she goes into hiding. And of course, Lao Chen experiences a kind of rekindling of an old crush that he had, and so she goes into hiding. The thing that really motivates Chen is that he wants to find Little Ji. There are multiple points where Fang Caodi is coming up to Lao Chen and trying to really push him to say, hey, there's this missing month, what are we going to do about it? And Lao Chen doesn't want anything to do with it. That, of course, changes as he kind of develops a deeper and deeper crush on Little Ji, and ultimately it's his feelings for her that propel him to go eventually kind of find this missing month with Feng Caodi. The book is kind of billed as a Chinese Brave New World. In fact, one of the blurbs on the back of this is from Michael Schaub at NPR, and he says, "Smart, incendiary, although the fat years clearly owes a debt to Brave New World, Chan's characters are infinitely more believable and drawn with a real sense of sympathy and understanding." So I was watching Better Than Food's recent review on Brave New World. In that review, he reminded me, because it's been like 10, maybe 11 years since I've read that book, he reminded me that the actual story of the book isn't that compelling, and really the most interesting thing is kind of the background society that Huxley has created. Kind of the same thing with this novel, actually. Although whereas Brave New World is really more interested in depicting the future technological advances and the drugs in the future, this book is a lot more focused on kind of the consequences of recent and ongoing Chinese history and where that's going to lead to. But it's so focused on that to the point that a lot of the book becomes exposition as opposed to storytelling. But in certain ways, I really feel like this was a book written for people like me, which is to say, people that know fuck all about Chinese history, recent or ancient. One of the helpful things in this is that you've got these translator notes at the end, and almost any time that kind of an unfamiliar historical event would come up, it's explained back here. And this was a really educational read for me because I really don't know that much. I mean, I can explain to you what the Cultural Revolution or the Great Leap Forward was in 2 or 3 sentences, but that's it. I mean, I didn't know anything about the Gang of Four. I didn't know anything about kind of the religious crackdowns that they had in the early 80s. And I didn't know anything about the period of reform that started with I forget the guy's name, started in 1992. And so it was this really weird reading experience where all along the way I felt really compelled to keep reading the book, but it's more because I was really interested in continuing to learn about the recent Chinese history as opposed to the story itself. Another one of the problems for this is a problem that I bring myself, and that's because, look, I only speak English. I know a very stupid tourist's amount of Spanish and German because I've studied those at different points in my life, and I know nothing of Chinese, obviously. And one of the problems when you're reading a book in translation is that you can kind of get the sensation that you're lacking a certain language or literary richness, and that's one of the feelings that I get not only with this novel, but I've gotten that before with a couple Mo Yan novels. That's the only other Chinese writer of consequence that I've read, but I noticed that there's this similar, you're kind of playing a game of telephone with the translator and the original writer. One of the things that I've noticed in this novel was that he'll almost re-explain or re-summarize a previous sentence with a new sentence, and so it feels very repetitive. The book does have some interesting side characters. For instance, Little Ji's son is a little toady Chinese fascist who's just the biggest suck-up to the Chinese government and so easy to hate. Then you also have this former child slave who worked in an illegal brick kiln, and that was a whole nother historical rabbit hole that I went down. And then one of the really interesting characters who will figure big into the ending is this insomniac Politburo member who the only time he can ever get to sleep is when he's at these movie nights that he goes to with Lao Chen, the protagonist. The last third of this novel is billed as an epilogue, which is kind of long for an epilogue. The 3 main characters kidnap this aforementioned Politburo committee member. It's not presented as an interrogation, but as this sort of long exposition and narration that's kind of here and there peppered by different little interrogations that the characters have, just to kind of break up the flow. This epilogue, this long exposition, basically covers kind of the recent and maybe ongoing geopolitical strategies and history of China, followed by a new policy plan that they set in place once the Great Depression of 2011 kicks in, and it's reminiscent of a kind of Great Leap Forward cultural revolution type plan. And I will give credit, the plan does seem pretty plausible. Again, I'm not the expert on, recent Chinese history and geopolitical strategies, but it did seem like it was well researched and that it followed certainly a kind of logic. I do like this revelation at the end where when it's talking about like the amnesia that Lao Chen and other characters have experienced for this lost month, this isn't some magical drug that like China pumped in, and we'll get to magical drugs here in just a second. But it wasn't some like outside force, it was something that organically happened within the Chinese people. Because it does bring it back to the individual and what our responsibility is to kind of our collective memory. A society's collective memory is something that, we're constantly building and growing and creating, and that we each kind of have a responsibility to keep certain memories alive. And while I've mentioned some of the problems that I have with this book, I think honestly the biggest failure for me is the relationship between Little Ji and Lao Chen just seems totally unbelievable. It feels very wooden and just generally kind of lacks a depth and romance that you would expect in this kind of novel. Add to the fact that it just ended up feeling undercut by the revelation at the end that the Chinese government has been pumping low-grade ecstasy into the water ever since 2011. And so once you reflect on that, you're like, okay, was the rekindling of the old crush just another effect of the ecstasy? It just felt to me that the only reason to have that love story was because the plot necessitated it. I hope I'm not being too negative. Am I being too negative? I mean, again, I had fun learning about all the history that I did with this book, and I thought that the translated edition with its translator notes was really helpful. Plus, it just kind of naturally sparked a curiosity in me. I definitely want to read more Chinese books. I'm actually interested in reading this guy named, I think his name's Yan Lianka. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. But yeah, I guess I kind of want to use this channel to talk about some of these more, complicated reading experiences. If there are any viewers out there that have any suggestions for like contemporary 21st century Chinese novels, hit me up with them in the comments. Thanks for watching, and until next time.
The way things change is because lots of people are working all the time. And, they're working in their communities, in their workplace, or wherever they happen to be, and they're building up the basis for popular movements which are going to make changes. That's the way everything has ever happened in history, whether it was the end of slavery or whether it was the democratic revolutions or anything you want, you name it, that's the way it worked.